When I first noticed the changes in Vanessa, I didn't think much of it. We all go through phases, right? But then the little things started piling up. She was spending more time at work, her phone was always on silent, and she suddenly had a password on it. The intimacy between us dwindled, replaced by awkward silences and excuses. I tried to convince myself that it was just stress, that we were going through a rough patch. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. It was the way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't look at me anymore. Her eyes seemed distant, like she was miles away even when we were in the same room. One evening, Vanessa casually mentioned that her ex-boyfriend, Tom, had started working at her firm. She brought it up like it was no big deal, mentioning how odd it was to see him after all these years. I played it cool, pretending it didn't bother me, but it planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Over the next few days, I noticed little things that fed my suspicion. She began checking her phone more frequently, often smiling or looking serious, then quickly putting it away when I entered the room. Whenever I asked who she was texting, she'd brush it off with vague answers, claiming it was just work or her friends. But the more she dismissed my questions, the more convinced I became that something wasn't right. It wasn't just the phone, though. Vanessa started staying late at the office more often, always with some excuse about deadlines or last-minute meetings. And whenever I mentioned her ex, she'd get defensive, insisting that it was purely professional and that I had nothing to worry about. But I couldn't shake the growing unease in my gut. I decided to take a chance. I told Vanessa that I had a business trip coming up, a 2-day conference out of town. She didn't question it, just gave me a distracted kiss and wished me a good trip. Her lack of concern only fueled my doubts. Instead of leaving town, I stayed in a hotel across the city, far enough away to keep up the pretense, but close enough to keep an eye on things. The first night, I drove back to our neighborhood, parking a few houses down from ours. I waited in the car, my heart pounding as the minutes ticked by. Around 9 p.m., Vanessa's car pulled into the driveway. But she wasn't alone. Tom stepped out of the passenger seat, his arm brushing against Vanessa's as they walked to the front door. My heart sank as I watched them enter the house together. I wanted to storm in, to confront them then and there, but I held back. I needed proof, something undeniable. I knew if I burst in without it, she'd just deny everything, make up some excuse. No, I had to be smart about this. The next morning, while Vanessa was at work, I went home and installed a small camera in the living room, carefully hidden among the books on the shelf. I also placed a voice recorder under the couch, just in case they decided to keep their conversations private. That evening, I returned to my hiding spot down the street, waiting for them to arrive. Sure enough, just after 8 p.m., Vanessa and Tom pulled up again. This time, they didn't waste any time. As soon as they were inside, they were all over each other, kissing passionately as they stumbled toward the bedroom. I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I watched the footage later that night, my stomach twisting as I saw them together, heard the things they said to each other. It was all there. The proof I needed. But I didn't confront Vanessa right away. Instead, I started planning my revenge. Over the next few days, I acted like nothing was wrong. I was careful not to let Vanessa see any change in my behavior. I needed her to believe that everything was normal, that I had no idea what was going on. I began to pay more attention to the details of her affair, collecting more evidence, learning her routines. She would meet Tom at a nearby hotel on Fridays during her lunch breaks, or sometimes they'd sneak off together after work when she claimed she was staying late. I made sure to track every meeting, every encounter, and I documented everything. But I didn't let on. I kept playing the part of the oblivious husband, even as I plotted my revenge. It wasn't enough to just confront her. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal and humiliation she had inflicted on me. I wanted her to experience the gut-wrenching sting of being deceived by someone you trusted with your entire being. So I started an affair of my own. There was a woman at work, Jessica, who had always been flirtatious with me. She was beautiful, confident, and made it clear that she was interested. Under normal circumstances, I would have never crossed that line. But this wasn't a normal situation anymore. I began seeing Jessica, and it wasn't just about sex. It was about taking back control, about showing Vanessa that I wasn't the fool she thought I was. I knew exactly what she was doing, and now I was doing it too. My affair with Jessica was meticulously planned. I documented every detail, just like I had with Vanessa. I wanted to gather enough evidence to confront Vanessa with it, to throw it in her face and show her that I was not as easily fooled as she had believed. One Friday, I set my plan into motion. Vanessa had told me she was going to visit her sister for the weekend. Another lie, of course, since I knew she'd be spending it with Tom. I pretended to believe her, kissed her goodbye, and wished her a pleasant trip. As soon as she was gone, I invited Jessica over. We spent the day together, and I made sure to take pictures, leaving a trail of evidence that Vanessa would eventually discover. I wanted her to realize that I could play the same game she was playing. That evening, I packed my bags and left a note on the kitchen counter. It was brief, but to the point. I know about Tom. I'll be back Sunday evening. Let's talk then. I knew the note would catch her off guard, that it would leave her in a state of panic all weekend, but I didn't care. I wanted her to squirm, to question what I knew and how I knew it, and I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions. When I returned home on Sunday, the house was eerily quiet. Vanessa was sitting in the living room, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. The note I had left was on the coffee table in front of her. "Mark," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice cold. "Don't say a word." She looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that she was caught. But she had no idea just how deep my knowledge went. I pulled out my phone and played the video of her and Tom together, the same one I'd watched over and over, each time feeling the sting of betrayal. Vanessa's face crumpled as she watched, her hands covering her mouth in horror. "Please, Mark, I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't just hurt me, Vanessa. You destroyed everything we had. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you brought him into our home." She broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt no sympathy. The anger and pain she had caused were too overwhelming. But I wasn't done yet. "I've got something to show you," I said. I handed her my phone, showing her the pictures I had taken with Jessica, the evidence of my own affair. Vanessa stared at the screen, her sobs turning into gasps of shock. "How could you?" she choked out, looking up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "You think you're the only one who can play this game? I know what you've been doing with Tom," I shot back. "I know everything." She was speechless, her face a mixture of horror and disbelief. I could see the realization dawning on her, trying to process the fact that I had turned the tables on her. "I did it to show you what it feels like," I continued, my voice hard, "to let you know that you're not the only one capable of deceit. But unlike you, I'm not going to drag this out. I want you out of this house, and I want a divorce." Vanessa's expression crumbled, and she reached out to me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "It's over, Vanessa. There's nothing left to save." The shock on her face was replaced by a deep sadness, and she nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mark," she whispered, her voice broken. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, my voice cold. "Pack your things and go. I don't ever want to see you again." As Vanessa packed her bags, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with a lingering sadness. I had achieved my revenge, but it didn't erase the hurt. It didn't change the fact that my marriage had been destroyed, that the woman I had once loved was now just a painful memory. When she finally left, I sat down in the living room, the silence of the empty house pressing in around me. I had won, but it felt like a hollow victory. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching emptiness. But I knew one thing for sure. I had taken back control. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was moving on, leaving Vanessa and her betrayal behind, determined to rebuild my life and find a path forward.